So imagine this. You just spent like $40,000 on recruiting fees to poach this President's Club winner from one of your top competitors.
Oh, yeah. A huge investment.
Massive. And their resume is just completely flawless. I mean,
Yeah.
the interview was this absolute masterclass in charisma. You bring them on board, and you're expecting them to, immediately start raining revenue.
Right, because that's what you paid for.
Exactly. But then, 6 months later, their pipeline is a total ghost town. They are constantly complaining about the lack of marketing support, and you are quietly asking HR how to structure a severance package. So what actually happened?
Well, it is genuinely the single most expensive blind spot in corporate leadership today. I mean, you hired the results, but you completely failed to hire the conditions that actually created those results.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today's deep dive is engineered specifically for you. The sales leader, the VP of sales, the founder, or, the hiring manager, tasked with driving actual commercial growth.
Yeah, anyone with a revenue target on their back.
Exactly. We are tearing down the traditional hiring playbook today. We want to uncover why proven top-tier sales talent so frequently just stalls out when they change uniforms. And we are basing this on a really groundbreaking structural framework from an article by Nathan Davis over at The Sales Experts.
And, they really have the data to back this up. They've assessed thousands of candidates across sectors, everything from complex technical and industrial markets to, high-velocity software and B2B consumer spaces.
That's a massive sample size.
Huge. And the pattern across all those sectors is just undeniable. When a highly compensated, previously successful sales hire fails, it is almost never a failure of effort or raw intelligence.
Wait, really? It's not just them getting lazy?
No, not at all. It's a failure of structural alignment. The core issue is that hiring managers fall victim to the halo effect. They see a recognizable logo on a resume, maybe a Hifitenji company or some major market leader, and they see a massive W-2 or this history of quota overachievement.
Right, and they get blinded by the big numbers.
Yeah, exactly. It creates this cognitive bias. The hiring manager just assumes that success is this inherent trait of the candidate, like it's something carried internally from job to job.
I actually want to challenge that assumption right out of the gate, though, because the entire mythology of the sales profession contradicts what you're saying.
Oh, totally. The myth of the rainmaker.
Right. The lore of the ultimate rainmaker is that they can drop into literally any scenario, read the room, and generate cash. I mean, if you understand human psychology, if you know how to uncover pain and drive urgency, shouldn't you be able to sell enterprise software just as effectively as you sell, commercial real estate?
See, what's fascinating here is that specific mythology is precisely what costs companies millions of dollars in mishires. It assumes a salesperson operates in a total vacuum.
Which they don't.
No, they don't. A salesperson is part of a much broader commercial ecosystem. Their individual talent is heavily subsidized by the environment they operate in. Think of it like a harvest. When you look at a track record of success, you are looking at the harvest.
Right, the yield.
Exactly. But the traditional interview process rarely investigates the soil quality, the climate, or, the farming equipment that actually allowed that harvest to grow in the first place.
Ah.
You simply cannot decouple the performer from their environment and expect the exact same yield. The fundamental metric we need to be evaluating isn't past performance at all.
It's transferability.
Yes. Transferability.
So it's like drafting an elite marathon runner and expecting them to win a 100-meter sprint just because they're both, running. The raw talent is there, but the race is entirely different.
That is a perfect analogy.
So we really need to map these hidden variables.
Sure.
If we are decoupling the harvest from the soil, what are the specific nutrients, the environmental factors that are dictating the success? Because from a high-level executive view, a CRM is a CRM, a pipeline is a pipeline, and a quota is just a quota.
Right. It all looks the same on a spreadsheet. But the framework from the sales experts actually isolates 5 shifting variables that dictate these selling conditions. These are the absolute structural pillars that must be evaluated.
Okay, let's go through it. What's the first one?
Let's start with the one that dictates almost everything else downstream. The level of brand recognition or market maturity. We have to ask, at their previous company, did they have massive internal support and brand equity, or were they building trust from absolute zero?
Oh, wow. I see this trap constantly.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, a VP of sales at a Series A startup hires the #1 enterprise rep out of Salesforce or Oracle. They just assume this rep knows how to navigate massive deals.
Yeah.
But what they don't factor in is that when you call from Salesforce, The prospect assumes your platform works.
They assume your company will actually still exist in 5 years.
Exactly. Half of the trust equation is literally solved before the rep even opens their mouth.
The cognitive load on the buyer is just drastically reduced. A rep backed by a monolithic brand is essentially acting as a guide for a buyer who already wants to make a purchase. But you take that exact same top performer and drop them into an unlisted, totally disruptive startup.
It's a completely different game.
Suddenly, nobody's returning their emails. And when they do get a meeting, they have to spend the first 45 minutes just justifying the company's financial viability. Proving the technology isn't just vaporware. It requires an entirely different kind of emotional resilience and a much more aggressive, evangelistic communication style.
Which perfectly dictates the next pressure point, right? The lead generation model.
Yes.
Because if you have that massive brand equity, you're likely swimming in inbound interest. If you don't, you are out there hunting in the dark. Here's where it gets really interesting. I've been thinking about the difference between managing a flood of inbound leads versus hunting for outbound business. It's essentially the difference between a triage nurse and a field diagnostician.
Oh, I love that. Unpack the mechanics of that analogy for a moment.
Well, an inbound rep is basically a triage nurse. They have a waiting room full of bleeding patients who already know they need a medical intervention.
Yeah.
The skill required there is just prioritization, categorization, and rapid processing.
Right, you have to quickly assess who needs surgery today and who can just take an aspirin and go home.
Exactly. But an outbound rep, they are literally walking down the street trying to convince perfectly healthy-looking people that they have a hidden terminal disease. The emotional rejection, the strategy to manufacture awareness, it's a completely different neurological exercise.
That is the perfect way to articulate the psychological divide. A hiring manager sees a candidate who generated, say, $10 million in revenue last year, but what the resume completely obscures is that the $10 million was generated by closing highly qualified inbound demo requests that were fed to them by a $50 million marketing machine.
Right. They didn't hunt for any of it.
Exactly. The rep is a phenomenal closer of interested buyers, but your company might need a hunter who can build a pipeline from scratch. If you put the triage nurse out on the street, they will starve, because they have never had to manufacture the demand themselves.
And if you're manufacturing that demand from scratch, the size of the target matters immensely. Which brings us to the third variable, deal size and contract value. Transactional volume versus massive strategic contracts.
This variable alters the entire daily operational cadence of the salesperson. A rep who is highly successful at closing, like 60 small $5,000 deals a quarter, is operating with extreme high velocity.
Yeah, high volume, fast pace.
They have mastered the art of creating immediate urgency. They know how to push for a signature on the first or second call, manage a high-churn pipeline, and just ruthlessly disqualify tire kickers.
But if you take that high velocity closer and hand them a single $3 million enterprise account, their entire internal rhythm is going to short circuit.
Absolutely.
I've actually watched this happen in real life.
Yep.
The transactional rep gets into month 4 of a complex negotiation. Their internal dopamine loop, which is hardwired to get a closed-won notification every single Friday, starts screaming that the deal is dying just because it's taking too long.
So they panic.
Yes, they panic. They push way too hard. They offer some unnecessary discount just to force a signature, and they end up deeply alienating a massive enterprise client who's literally just moving at their normal, cautious pace.
Because they misinterpret thoroughness as hesitation. And, the inverse is equally destructive. You take a strategic enterprise rep who is used to nursing 3 giant deals a year, and you drop them into a high-velocity transactional role, they will over-engineer incredibly simple deals.
Oh, yeah. 30-page proposals for a tiny deal.
Exactly. They'll try to schedule multi-departmental discovery calls for a $3,000 software license, and they will lose the business to a competitor who just sent a frictionless checkout link.
Because the enterprise rep's muscle memory is built for survival over long durations, which is the perfect bridge to our fourth variable, sales cycle length. Because the $3 million deal does not close in 14 days.
No, it doesn't. Time is a massive filter for talent. If a candidate has built their success on a 30-day sales cycle, they expect relatively instant gratification. If your product requires an 18-month sales cycle involving pilot programs, extensive legal redlining, security audits, board-level approvals,
That 30-day rep is going to experience severe organizational whiplash.
severe whiplash, they may simply lack the organizational stamina required to keep a deal warm for a year and a half without losing momentum or just getting bored and distracted.
It's like a completely different project management skill set. In a 30-day cycle, the salesperson is the sole driver. In an 18-month cycle, the salesperson is essentially a general contractor, orchestrating a dozen different subcontractors: legal, product, security, implementation. They have to maintain extreme discipline to ensure the momentum doesn't just die in some procurement officer's inbox in month 11.
And that actually leads us to the final and perhaps most nuanced shifting variable, the buyer profile. Over those 18 months, who are they actually communicating with? Because speaking to a visionary founder requires a completely different vocabulary than speaking to a cynical compliance officer.
Oh man, I see interviews fall apart here all the time.
Yeah.
A VP hires a killer rep who is historically brilliant at selling marketing automation to chief marketing officers.
That's right, CMOs.
Yeah, CMOs. And CMOs care about brand impact, growth, and synergy. They're optimistic buyers. But let's say your company sells cybersecurity software to chief information security officers. CISOs do not care about synergy.
Not even a little bit.
They care about risk mitigation, compliance, and not ending up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for a massive data breach. They are inherently defensive, pessimistic buyers.
So the entire value proposition must be inverted. If your candidate tries to use the upbeat, growth-oriented language that worked on the CMO while pitching the CISO, they will immediately lose all credibility. The prospect will view them as lightweight.
Even if they're super charismatic.
Even then, because their frequency is totally misaligned with the buyer's frequency.
Okay, so we have these 5 variables: brand maturity, lead generation model, deal size, sales cycle length, and buyer profile. Individually, I can see how a highly confident, maybe slightly arrogant hiring manager might look at any one of these and think, it's fine, they're a natural seller, we'll just train them on the nuances.
Right, and that arrogance is the genesis of the transferability trap. When you stack those variables together, you aren't just asking a candidate to make a slight pivot, you are asking them to perform a completely different profession.
Wow.
The skill overlap between closing a $5,000 inbound lead with a small business owner in 2 days versus hunting a $5 million outbound enterprise contract with a committee of risk-averse executives over 2 years is practically zero.
So let's quantify the fallout of ignoring this. Because when executives model the cost of a bad hire on their spreadsheets, they usually just look at the sunk cost of the base salary and the recruiter fee. Maybe they factor in a few months of draw. But that is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? The collateral damage of a misaligned hire goes incredibly deep.
Oh, the salary is the least of your concerns. The true devastation happens out in your market territory. Just think about the delayed pipeline development. If a newly hired rep was supposed to be doing heavy outbound prospecting, but they are secretly terrified of cold outreach because they came from an inbound culture, your pipeline fundamentally halts.
They'll just find other things to do.
Exactly. They will spend their days doing research and optimizing their CRM dashboards just to look busy. You might not realize the pipeline is hollow for 6 to 9 months, and by then, the revenue target for the entire fiscal year is completely unrecoverable.
And what about the burned accounts? If you put a transactional high-pressure closer onto your top-tier enterprise target list, they aren't just failing to close deals, they are actively salting the earth.
Yes. Ruining the brand.
They are irritating key decision-makers with inappropriate pressure tactics. They can ruin a relationship with a strategic account that your marketing team spent 3 years nurturing.
And you also have to factor in the massive spike in leadership drain. Your frontline sales managers end up spending 80% of their coaching time trying to salvage the performance of the misaligned hire.
Which means your actual top performers are being ignored.
Precisely. Add to that the toxic drop in team morale when one highly paid individual is constantly missing target, and you suddenly have a systemic cultural issue.
Okay, so this brings us to the operational fix. Recognizing the problem is one thing, but how does an executive actually re-engineer their hiring process to catch this? We clearly can't just rely on candidates to self-diagnose their weaknesses during an interview. Professional salespeople are literally trained to overcome objections and present a highly polished narrative.
This is exactly why the team at the Sales Experts developed the Sales Hunter Intelligence Evaluation. It is a structured, forensic approach designed specifically to dismantle the transferability trap. It moves the hiring process completely away from subjective gut feelings and charisma and turns it into a predictable, objective science.
So break down the mechanics of that evaluation for me. How does a VP of sales actually execute this in an interview room tomorrow morning?
It requires completely changing the way you investigate past success. So when a candidate says, I was the #1 rep globally and closed $15 million last year, the traditional hiring manager usually says, wow, tell me about your biggest win.
Right. And then the candidate tells a heroic, highly sanitized story.
The classic lone wolf rainmaker narrative. But using the Sales Hunter Intelligence Evaluation, the hiring manager doesn't ask for the heroic story. They forensically deconstruct the ecosystem of that 15 million.
So what do they ask instead?
They ask things like, of that 15 million, what percentage was generated from existing accounts versus net new logos? For the net new logos, what percentage of the leads were generated by your marketing department versus your own cold outreach?
Oh, getting into the weeds.
Exactly. In your biggest deal, how many competitors were in the bake-off? And what was your company's market share compared to theirs? Who was the ultimate economic buyer, and how many months elapsed between the first discovery call and the signed contract?
You are forcing the candidate to quantify the environmental support they received. You are basically mapping their past reality so you can lay it over your future expectations.
Yes. It creates an objective scoring matrix. If your company requires an outbound hunter to sell complex multi-million-dollar deals to the C-suite over an 18-month cycle with zero brand recognition, you have a very specific environmental profile. When you forensically map the candidate's $15 million success, you might discover it was entirely inbound, transactional, and sold to mid-level managers, backed by a massive marketing budget.
So the evaluation framework mathematically proves that their success is just not transferable to your environment.
It strips away all that subjective charm that so often clouds the judgment of even the most experienced executives. You stop being hypnotized by the W-2 and you start acting like an auditor analyzing an ecosystem.
By utilizing this structured evaluation, you create extreme consistency in your hiring decisions. You reduce the risk of costly mishires because you are building a team based on empirical alignment, not just hope, a slick resume, and a really good conversational rapport. This completely reframes the mechanics of building a high-performance commercial team. So for you, the executive listening right now, here are the core actionable takeaways you need to implement before you conduct your very next interview.
Number 1, stop worshiping past revenue in a vacuum. Performance is always context-driven.
Right. You must decouple the harvest from the soil and relentlessly investigate the environment that created the results. Number 2, assess for transferability, not just talent.
You have to map the 5 variables: brand maturity, lead generation, deal size, cycle length, and buyer profile.
Because if the candidate's historical variables do not align with your current operational reality, their past success is actually a massive liability, not an asset. And finally, number 3, ditch the subjective interview guesswork. Implement a forensic, structured alignment framework to protect your pipeline, your territory, and your recruitment budget.
Because if you do not apply this level of rigorous structural analysis, your hiring process is fundamentally just a coin flip disguised as a strategy. But when you do apply it, you build sales teams that deliver highly predictable, reliable commercial growth.
So here is your immediate call to action. Before you post that next job description, before you sign a retainer with a recruiter, you must clearly define the environmental role and the success profile required to secure the top 1% of sales talent for your specific ecosystem. For true sales success, you need to visit thesalesexperts.com.
Highly recommend it.
Dive into their resources, learn how to aggressively apply this structured evaluation approach to your recruitment process, and partner with the sales experts to build a truly bulletproof commercial team.
And, I want to leave you with a lingering, somewhat provocative thought about your own organization, something to deeply analyze regarding the operations you currently oversee.
So hear it.
If your absolute best, most untouchable, top-performing salesperson left your team tomorrow to join a competitor with a completely different buyer profile and zero brand recognition, would they still be a top performer?
Oh, wow.
And if the answer is no, what does that ultimately tell you about the power of the system you've built versus the raw talent you think you've hired?